Now, I know you probably have a million tips for passing exams, but I want to hear your number one top tip for everyone for
Number
passing
one.
exams.
Little pressure here.
Yeah, exactly.
For me personally, I'm huge on understanding basic principles, because during the heat of an exam, you can't anticipate the questions they're going to ask, exactly. And you can't think too much on the fly. At least I couldn't. So
Yes.
I knew I couldn't memorize my way through the exams. I had to understand the basic principles. And if I understood the basic principles, then I could adapt to the questions that they had on the exam. Also, it made it much easier to study. And so, like for FM, I looked at the basic principle there is, you got to identify the cash flows and you adjust for interest. And that's all of FM. It applies to loans, to bonds, to annuities, but that's all it was. And once you understood that and you got good at that, they could throw a question out there and, you're always asking yourself, okay, where are my cash flows and how do I adjust it for interest? And you realize that they may throw different business terms at you, but it's the same principles. And so if you can be an expert at that, not only will you be successful at that exam, then when you go to like LTAM and you find out, well, that's just identifying cash flows, adjusting for interest and probabilities. It's not a new exam. They're going to throw new terminology at you, but it really builds on what you learned from basic principles from FM and from P. So you'll forget less as you go from exam to exam, and you also remember more during the heat of an exam.
When I was studying, some people like to take 2 hours a day. I just preferred why deal with the commute, and I would just take 1 day a week off to study, and they were very flexible and encouraging about it.
That's a great way to do it. That is really nice. Every once in a while I would do that where I'd take a full day, and it's just so productive instead of like little bits here and there.
If you've got calculus under the belt and you want to take the first exam or the financial math one, take that and see if you pass.
Yep.
And so just try it, and then if you have an exam that you've passed on your own, and then you can actually make the eyes of somebody who's hiring. If you're just saying that you have an interest in it, but you didn't go through an actuarial program or something like that, it might be hard to do.
And I think that's why a lot of guys do drop out, because we see in the movies, especially the American movies, everyone having fun in college, big party, and then we get there and it's like, oh flip, there's exams and these exams are tough. So I think that also contributes to a big dropout rate, is the fact that people just don't know what they're getting into when they start actuarial science.
The other place where we hope that it will be helpful, and we had this in mind as we were talking through the content of what would appear in the book, on the SOA syllabus, I'm a CAS guy, so I can't remember which exam it is, but R is a requirement for SOA exams now.
Oh, really?
I want to say that, yeah. So on the syllabus, there is a text for introductory R. And it's a good book, but as an adjunct for exam preparation, we're hoping that students may find this of use.
No, at the time, this sounds so archaic, but they even had a study room.
Oh, did they really?
With carols in it.
Wow.
And, and so I always went in and studied first thing in the morning, because that's when I could think the best.
Yep.
And my day had not encroached upon me. So my approach was I studied from 7 to 9 in the morning, and at 9 o'clock I left, and I did not go back into that room the rest of the day. But everybody's got their own different ways. Don't let me say one way is the best. But I was able to get a lot of study time.
I hear people say like there's life, there's work, and there's exams, and only 2 of those can survive. And I kind of found that to be true actually, but yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
So sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, I was just going to say that I also had some good friends who were studying at the same time as me, and sometimes the same exams as me. So sometimes I mixed up the studying and the social time a little bit, which probably helped avoid some burnout to some extent.
I started to create first for what's the P exam now, an FM.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of organized everything and for my own use, for my own classroom use, and then I got to know the person who became the president of ACTEX. I met him when I was in Texas, and we talked a little bit about it. He said, "Well, I'm part of he was at Northeastern University, and they wrote some study material for students for some of the upper level exams." He said, "Well, maybe let's see if we can add these to the list." And so I wrote. So we added what was then P and FM to his list. And then as I was writing teaching other courses, I would organize the material, and then thinking about, well, now I have to really be more thoughtful about it, because this is going to be used by students who are not in my course. They're just going to be reading it. And so then you have to be careful about organization of the material, what's important, how to present it in a clear and readable way, and so those are the things that really go into it. I sometimes try to think of it, and also when I'm teaching, I try to think of how, if I'm the person listening to this, is this going to be clear enough? Try to put myself in the place of being a student, and if what I'm being presented is clear, comprehensive, and that's kind of how I approach that.
The companies that I'm aware of are very supportive. I know ours is, but we encourage folks to get started on studying for the exams early. And anytime you have an opportunity to take some study time, go ahead and do it, as opposed to just trying to think that, okay, I'm just going to take the last 4 days off. And sometimes you'll be able to do that, but sometimes you might not.
I dabbled with the exams. I had support from the Actuarial department. Like, they paid for my supplies, they gave me study hours. So it's a supported field. It's not it's not a separate entity. It's like they want you to take exams if you're about that. I know there's 3 or 4 people who 2 of them or 3 of them have their ASAs, and a couple others still taking exams. So it's highly supported, and I think it's highly relevant.
Holding myself accountable and having good time management. What helped me the most was finding a time where I was most productive studying and taking advantage of it. And I know this is kind of cliche, but keeping track of the hours that I studied, so that if I had a certain goal I wanted to hit, which was normally pretty aggressive, so that if I missed it, I was okay. But at least shooting for that goal would keep me pretty much on track.
Yeah.
For me, I studied better in the morning, so I would wake up a couple hours before work, and I'd put in a couple hours. If I was able to, I'd do an hour on lunch, and then when I got home, maybe an hour or 2, but I wouldn't feel too bad if I missed it, because I had already studied quite a bit that day.
Right.
That was I think spreading it out too helped, because those huge blocks of 6 hours studying, I mean, sometimes you just got to do it. There's no way around it.
Some of the things I was doing were just a waste of time.
Yeah.
And so when you reallocate the energy into methods that actually work, it's amazing the results that you can produce. But yeah, to add some more color on that exam drought, I definitely had the doubts that I imagine most people are familiar with. If you fail an exam, you start questioning the career path. Do I have what it takes to come back from this? Do I even want to come back from this?
Yes.
Because several more exams down the line, hundreds of more study hours. And kind of the deal I made with myself was that if I was going to come back and do it, I was going to change my approach. I wasn't going to put in the 300 hours per exam or the 100-hour rule for studying. I was going to do things differently, and just decided to try it out, and it worked. So
that's
how
pretty
I
amazing.
got here.
So for yourself, Roy, these study tactics that you developed, is this something that came naturally to you, or is it something that once you got your FSA, you look back in hindsight and you're like, oh, that worked really well. I'm curious if you proactively develop these tactics.
That's a good question, Paul. I think it all was more or less driven from a natural desire on my end to maybe take shortcuts or just shorten the amount of time it takes to do anything in life. And I feel like growing up, junior high, high school, I played very competitive tennis, and I played soccer and all these other activities, and my time was limited, but I knew academics were very important. So even studying in junior high, high school, I would more or less work backwards and figure out what's important for me to do well on exams, because doing well on exams equated to a good GPA. And I found myself, scoring very well in academics without necessarily spending, time reading through textbooks multiple times, things like that, because I had more of a targeted approach to figuring out what was important and hitting the key points.
Yeah.
When I'm reading through material.
A lot of dedication, and it certainly helps to have study time. I thought the career was great because what career do you get paid to study? And then they pay for your exam and your material. Yes. And then when you pass, they pay you more.
Exactly.
It's a pretty good deal.
And I did put in a lot more effort for the other preliminary exams. I did a lot. The issue was I did a lot of practice problems for the preliminary exams. That's really the best, just even throughout. Don't wait to do the problems. Do them as soon as you have a little bit. Do some problems.
Definitely, yeah.
Every day.
I agree.
Yeah.
But I did another thing when I was studying for exams, which I think really helped. And that is I very rarely studied at home. One, because at home I was distracted more easily. Go to the kitchen, turn on the TV. So what I did was, I'm a morning person anyways. So I would show up to work before work started. So if work started at 8, I would show up at 6, or maybe 2 weeks beforehand, 5 or 4 o'clock if I needed to. And I would study before work. And if I had work study time, I would usually continue that on in the morning because, again, I'm a morning person. And then if I needed to study more, I studied immediately after work. So I always made my studying at work as almost like part of my part of my work day. So that when I was home, I was actually home.
That's
Whereas
smart.
if you try to go home and you have dinner, but then now you're going to leave and your wife's in the other room watching TV and she's like, why don't you come watch Game of Thrones with me? You're going to be like, I want to watch Game of
I'm going to do that.
Yeah. But if you're at work and then you're not going to leave and do that. So if you can build it as a part of your work day, I think you're going to find that's a lot better. And I usually never worked on Saturday ever. Definitely during football season. I wasn't working. I mean, I wouldn't study on Saturday.
Especially being an Alabama fan.
Exactly. So, Saturdays were no studying. I tended not to study on Sundays either unless it was getting close to the exam and I needed to, do some sample exams or work more problems or whatever. So if you can make it as much a part of work as you can, then it won't feel as big of a drain on you and on your social life as well.
I think when I studied for the exams, one of the things I really always tried to focus on was to really get to the heart of it and enjoy the process as much as I could, because I think some people really focus on just pass the exam, but I definitely wanted to pass the exam, but the learning process, I mean, I'd always loved to learn, and I didn't want the exams to be just a process just focused on getting to the end, but to actually enjoy the process and try and get to the heart of each exam as I went through it.